Chapter 6, Love and Spirit. Relationship number 1. Naive, that is what I was with my first romantic partnership. To sum it up, we dated 5.5 years and were married 5.5 years, a total of 11 years together with this guy who I met in college and just sort of stumbled into being with. When we started our second year of college, we were on again after that bumpy summer where I had broken up with him a couple of times, just like a confused 13-year-old girl would do with her first love interest. I had no idea what I wanted or how to figure out whatever relationship needs I did have. Somehow I thought I was supposed to be with him because he pursued me. I had never had a boyfriend before, so I did not know consciously what my type was. I did not know I was supposed to choose a partner with my heart or how that would look. Since a true heart connection had not presented itself, I mistakenly figured it could not and would not happen. I was glad to have someone to be with, but that is not near enough of a reason to date the first person available. It is normally at this point a person would realize if the relationship is a good match or not. A few things held me back from doing this. 1. I had already broken his heart a couple times during the summer. Although we never discussed being a couple, so I did not realize I was hurting him until after the fact. I didn't want to make another rash decision and risk hurting him again unnecessarily. I felt guilty about that. I wanted to wait and see because I realized I still barely knew him. I should give him a chance, right? 2. It often took more time for me than a normal person to realize how I felt about a situation, and I had to disconnect on taking appropriate action based on those feelings. I had to learn how to do that over years of observing others. 3. I did not even become aware of what my type was in a mate until my mid-30s. This was largely due to lack of dating and socializing experiences. I was still giggling over boys in high school instead of dating them. In the realm of social and emotional development, I was lagging by about 10 years. 4. Face-to-face disagreements or confrontations elicit a panicked flight response in my brain. Those situations are ones I just tried to avoid. Then I ended up feeling stuck instead of being assertive and clear with others concerning my personal boundaries and needs. Honestly, specific instructions on how to break up with someone and deal with the accompanying emotions would have helped me. I am just now getting a handle on vocalizing needs and boundaries for myself in my late 30s. A nice side effect of doing this is that it prevents others from taking advantage of me. I am not so much of an easy target as I was before. 5. I thought I should not give up so easily just because he didn't give me that butterflies feeling. I saw value in looking past the parts that made me uncomfortable and learning to love a person no matter what, but that would have played out better in a friendship without pressure to be intimate. The romance part just complicated matters. 6. In the end, I'll be honest. I settled for a partner who wanted me because no one else was lining up to be with me, and I was confused about that. Combine that with knowing another girl emailed him, and I just ended up going with it. It was a jealous and fear-based decision instead of a heart-based one. I did not know what living from the heart looked like yet. I became a martyr just to have a relationship, to get out of the family nest, and to survive in a world I was afraid of and unprepared to be alone in. For all these reasons, I am truly sorry. A breakup, although painful, is far better than watching a partnership slowly crumble to pieces. All too often, these realizations have come years after the fact in my own experience. It did not take long during our dating phase before he was asking me to gratify him. I thought I was supposed to since we were most likely going to get married. It all felt so unnatural because I had no true bond or attraction to him. No spark. Yet my intensely strong curiosity about what the full act of sex would feel like kept me doing what he asked. We were taught as Christians we could not have sex until marriage, and we stuck to that rule, technically. He had perfect pitch, and we loved to sing together. Music creates bonds in a way that nothing else can. We also developed cat characters after he heard me meow a few times. If we hadn't had music and a secret cat world in common, I don't know if our relationship would have lasted as long as it did. Those were the good times that made it all bearable. After college was over, I went back home for a time to work and pay off my college loan, and then I moved to the area where my boyfriend lived, in the middle of the country, to be closer to him. At one point, I decided my car needed a new paint color. I was tired of the maroon. What about yellow with black double racing stripes down the middle? Since I was on a budget, I chose to cover my car in duct tape. I do not know what possessed me to do this, but it sure was fun. It took me about a day and 30 rolls of this stuff to complete the job. A pair of policemen even pulled me over to get a better look at it. Many cars passing by took pictures with cell phones. Good times. For Christmas one year, my boyfriend's parents gave us all small gift cards to a used bookstore in town as a stocking stuffer. I went in a couple weeks later and found myself pulled to the mysterious metaphysical section. There were books on dreams, psychic powers, horoscopes, and meditation. I picked up a meditation book that had guided exercises in it. It seemed perfect for beginners with simple wording. I remembered Mom refusing to let me read a meditation book my primary care doctor let me borrow when I was a teenager. The doctor thought it would help me with anxiety. According to Mom, it was anti-Christian, even though there is a Bible verse about devoting oneself to prayer and meditation. The book got returned immediately. Mom wasn't here now, though. I bought the book and smuggled it into my room. There was an exercise that asked the reader to visualize a town, a house, etc., and that would symbolize the psyche of the reader. Thanks to Mom's help when I was in high school studying poetry, I was able to learn how to distinguish between literal definitions and metaphors. I thought it made interpretation of whatever I was reading endlessly fascinating. So I closed my eyes and began. I kept some paper and a pen handy to write about what happened afterwards. I went into my world and walked into a town of white, Pueblo-style houses, something you would see in the Southwest, even though I had not been there in real life, yet. I walked into a house that seemed to be meant for me. It had a red door. I walked in, knowing I had to look in all the rooms. I decided to start with a basement. I thought if there was anything scary, it would be there. What I learned was there was nothing to fear. All I found was a water heater tank. The main floor seemed fine, just an empty kitchen and living area. It was the same story with the second floor, just empty rooms. The third floor was the attic. I expected more of nothing. Instead, I saw 4 or 5 people dressed in clothes from the late 1800s or early 1900s. They had spectacles, pocket watches, and vests, mustaches, derby hats, and the women's hair was in buns, and they wore long skirts with ruffles. The oldest of them was a kind, gentle man with white hair and spectacles. He encouraged me to look out the tiny attic window. I did, and saw a barren, dead, burnt, ugly landscape. It had no signs of life. It gave me a sad, forlorn feeling. "It means you need friends," he said lovingly. My isolation was only hurting me. Maybe I could be more open and talkative instead of letting fear of being hurt run my life, I thought. The statement had certainly given me something to consider. I felt these people must be spirit guides of some sort. I went downstairs so I could exit the house and end the meditation. What I didn't expect was to see a little girl with brown hair and a little terrier puppy. I knelt down. "Hi, who are you?" I asked. She giggled and leaned over to whisper, "I'm you." She was so sweet and innocent. I couldn't help but smile and love her. Suddenly, the house started melting around us. Little Julie screamed. The dog ran out through a hole in the back door. If I didn't get us out, we would die in the molten house lava. I picked her up and ran out the front door with no time to spare. I set her down outside, hugged her tight, and said the words she longed to hear. "I'll always take care of you," I whispered, as tears ran down our faces. I walked away then, disappearing from that world and returning to this one. I was flat out amazed. It was the first and most meaningful meditation I have ever had. I did not make it a daily practice, though. I was unattached to needing anything to feel complete, except the idea of marriage for reasons of what I thought were security. I had not let that go yet. Around this time, I had a dream in which I was hitchhiking a ride from a truck driver, and he stabbed me in the stomach. He dumped me on the side of the road, and then suddenly, I was fine. I realized I had died and left my body. I went through some tall grass and found myself in a cave of mud. On a high ledge sat a guru with a bald head and a long white beard. He wore long robes. He told me I could only pass by him if I believed. I said with all conviction, "I do believe." Then a staircase formed from the mud, and I was able to walk up past him. I entered a room that seemed to be a dome shape. There were lots of other souls in this holding room, and a couple inches of water on the ground. There was sand under the water. The temperature was perfect, and the color was a pink-orange. It seemed to be glowing of its own source, and I felt like I was inside a sunset. A young man walked over to me, and I was attracted to him. I felt embarrassment that my ankles were showing under my robe for some reason. Then I woke up. It was a beautiful display of faith in my ability to trust where I was being guided in life. I have had many dreams since then in which I have crossed over to the other side and remarked to myself how death was not what everyone thought it was. I found it to be very pleasant and peaceful. My boyfriend moved back down to finish 2 more years of school where we had met, so he could be a Bible major and settle for a preaching job. In the meantime, I lived with his parents rent-free for some time. In order to plan our wedding, I moved down there too, 4 months prior to the event. I could not believe it was finally happening. It seemed to take forever for us to even set a date. I was renting a room from my old college English professor, an older divorced woman. One night I walked in while she was on the phone around the corner, so I just started up the stairs to my room. Then I realized she was talking about me. "She's so strange and quiet, and she can't even hang her bath towel the right way. She hangs it on her door instead of the bathroom hook." Tears sprang to my eyes as I stood on the top step, hearing everything about myself that she thought was odd and abnormal. Once again, I felt self-conscious about my own naturally quiet ways of being. As for the towel issue, I wanted so badly to tell her that I grew up in a house without enough bathroom hooks for all of us to hang towels. We all used our doorknobs for towel hanging, and our bedroom doors were not nicely painted like hers were. I retreated to my room and cried until the tears stopped flowing. For the rest of my time in her house, I hung my towel on the bathroom hook provided. This was the last straw of the big city living I had to get used to. I had already had my car totaled by a reckless driver, gotten laid off from a filing job, and watched my grandfather slowly die from multiple organ failure in the hospital. The traffic was horrendous. It was a lot of stress to happen in a very short time, all while planning a wedding. The night before the wedding, I was in a bad mood. Mom and Dad told me we could call it off if I didn't want to get married. I felt I was out of options, though. I did not want to live with my parents, and I felt like I had nowhere else to go. Living on my own seemed impossible, as I was out of work and out of money. My new husband had anger issues, a porn addiction, which he blamed on my summer breakups when we were dating, a video game addiction, and body image issues, to name a few things. I believed these things would improve after marriage. He told me they would. Instead, I found him to be the most difficult person I have ever lived with. He was angry at God, despite having chosen preaching as his career at the time. We both made mistakes involving other people. His started when we were engaged. I found out the day after I mailed out our wedding invitations, which confirmed a vision I had about it a year prior to my finding out. I even guessed correctly who it was. She was on the invite list and actually showed up, to my horror. My mistakes only took place after he encouraged it several times to even the score and had started threatening me with physical violence. I felt stuck, unsafe, and vulnerable to other men's advances. As strange as it sounds, these mistakes helped open me to not judge others so harshly and to realize there were other options to choose from. I found it ironic that men chased me after I was married, but never before. Adding to this the fact that sex with him was so very painful and I was living in misery. I bled the entire first year until he finally let me use lubrication to help. No one told me I would need it. I had to talk to other women on a Christian blog to get a clue. The irony of remaining a virgin until marriage only to realize we were sexually incompatible was certainly not lost on me. He liked to pull my hair, grope me roughly, and call me slut and whore, just like he heard in porn, I'm sure. My request that he stop did not keep the dirty names at bay for long. The fact that I stood up for myself in that instant really shows how much it bothered me. He expected me to do things he had seen on his computer. I had to be his stripper and his sex slave. If I didn't want to do something, he would quip, "This better be your best one yet." It killed any chance of me feeling something romantic towards him. Long gone were my dreams of emulating the special feelings from the movies I had seen. The longer I was married, the farther away that possibility seemed. Before we married, I was sure to tell him I need dark and quiet to sleep. I cannot even read a book if there is noise going on in the room. However, he did not take this statement seriously and often would bring his handheld gaming device to bed, playing until well after midnight. With the sound on, he would not let me sleep on the couch, even though I was the one who had to get up early to work the next morning. He would use this confrontation as an excuse to fight with me. He did not get that chance often with me, but this was the exception. I needed my sleep. Sometimes I could convince him to turn it off, but not without him huffing and fussing about it. Other nights I wasn't so lucky. On a Thanksgiving trip to see his brother, we were driving along and the car started making noise. We were also in the middle of a traffic jam and he lost it. He yelled at me for a very long time because it was all my fault since I had been the one to select the car. So naturally in his mind, anything wrong with it was all on me. I seriously considered catching a bus back home. I was having trouble figuring out just what I could be thankful for. Towards the end of the marriage, he wrote a blog post I found that called me socially inept, making fun of the way I rearranged the furniture every few months and saying that if a woman gives you trouble, she deserves to be hit like the bitch that she is, and ended the post by saying he would like to end it all with his gun. I never gave him trouble. His main complaint was I rolled my eyes too much and therefore did not respect him. However, he rarely acted in a respectful manner. After being threatened twice with physical abuse and an instance in which he got on top of my back, forcing all the air out of me, I knew it was time to leave after 11 years together. An honorable mention is the time he sped at 80 miles an hour in the left lane during hard rain, without the windshield wipers on. Nothing happened before this to set him off as far as I know. I closed my eyes and prayed for a quick death. The loving connection of caring and hope for healing I once felt for him had been disconnected. He drove me and all my good intentions away until I had nothing positive even left for myself. One cannot feel fear and love for a person simultaneously. I realized we were incompatible on every level after keeping a secret journal. I saw that no matter what my reaction was, supportive or quiet, that he was still angry. It had nothing to do with me. When I listened silently, he called me a worthless comforter. When I offered a loving reminder of God's love, he scoffed, "Don't tell me stuff I already know." Repetitive quirks like the furniture arranging I displayed can be clues to an upcoming shift. I later realized I was doing this in place of rearranging my life choices. Now that my life is different, there is no longer a need to rearrange my furniture. Even our darkest and most depressing moments are often precursors to the brightest revelations and changes. I don't always make that connection in a specific instance until after the fact. In the moment, it is too intense for me to experience it and analyze it at the same time. Journaling is very helpful to me for this reason, especially in times of high stress. One last attempt by me to save things was to try to buy a house. I thought if we could buy a house, then I could get a nice, snuggly cat, and at least then I could concentrate on making the house beautiful and having something to love on a more pure level than what the marriage had turned into. When the day came to submit an offer, he and I both signed the paper. It was then the agent mentioned we would be locked in if it was accepted. Something changed on my husband's face, and I knew I was in for it on the ride home. I was right. He yelled at me for not figuring it out on my own that he did not really want a house, even though he seemed okay with me talking about it and viewing houses. Wow. I assured him I would never look at another house with him again. I had to go straight to work after that appointment, and I sobbed the whole way there. I felt exasperated at having to deal with his tantrums, walking on eggshells all the time. About a year before I decided to leave, Mom started emailing me near-death accounts she found online during her own mother's dying process. I had just been praying to God to lift the bitterness out of my heart and show me how to love others unconditionally. I prayed for this because one day I had a sudden realization that, despite being a Christian, I felt annoyance instead of love for just about everyone. I believed that festered due to the poor marriage conditions I had volunteered for. I had wondered if I would really go to hell for ending my own life, but I did not want to hurt my family. It was a dark place to be. Mom warned me to only read the NDEs that were supported by scripture, but with thousands of accounts that all had a common theme of unconditional love, I knew I had to read them all. I could empathically feel the love they described. Tears of pure amazement and joy streamed from my eyes. This was what I needed to cultivate in my life. My idea of God and spirituality were blown wide open. Religion was too small a box for God. People of all lifestyles were having beautiful NDEs. My judgment meter was shattered. People were coming back to life and changing what wasn't working for them. It was inspiring. I thought sharing some with my husband would be healing. Instead, he scolded me for straying from the Bible. I went to be alone and cried. How silly of me to think that was a good idea. When I read suicide NDEs, I found that death was not an escape from problems, just delaying the spiritual work into another lifetime. Plus, the amount of regret a soul apparently felt after suicide was enormous because they realized how their choice affected their family and loved ones. They were sent back as it was not their time yet. Now I felt like there was hope again. It was time for a change. Since Grandma was close to the end of her earthly stay, I sent her a beautiful letter telling her how the stories of her life, things she might regret about her own choices, benefited my own life greatly with lessons of wisdom. She had been married to 2 men in her life, both alcoholics. Both brought shame and abuse upon their family. Grandma loved the letter and understood that we would see each other on the other side, that a physical goodbye was unnecessary. When I did not go to the funeral or display sadness, my husband told me I was not mourning the right way. I refused to dignify such ignorance with an answer. Instead, I asked to see her in my dream that night to know she was really okay. I awoke the next morning to remember that I had gone into a church and had to put on a white robe. I sat down next to a beautiful young woman with wavy brown hair and bright red lips who laughed with me about the fact that all the people on the other side of the church were people that were mourning for her passing, except she was right there, fully alive and youthful again. She was no further from them than just across the aisle. We laughed together at the absurdity of it all and the knowledge that death is not real. I spent 6 months saving up money to move across the country and praying my husband would be okay when I left. That was actually my main concern as he was so emotionally unstable. I chose the Southwest because I knew it would be warm and I had never been there before, which increased the chances of him not finding me. I did not know one person out there. Perfect. I decided on a whim I would go to a yoga teacher training for a month. I paid for it and arranged to rent a room with a local young family. I saved up money from my own job for my upcoming departure. I knew he would accuse me of stealing his money, and I was right. Months later, I found his blog, and his words did just that. For yoga school, I had to read the Bhagavad Gita, so I ordered a copy from a computer at work and figured I would get the mail before my husband did. He barely noticed anything when he was in video game mode, which was pretty much constant. I got home from work one night, and to my horror, the book was sitting on the couch on top of its box. He opened my mail. That was a first. I looked up this book, and although it's very old, you should know it was written by pagans, he declared smugly. He may as well have said heathen savages, because that is how he viewed them. I deflected the insult by saying, "Okay," and disappearing with the book. He always sought out conflict, so the less reaction I gave, the less he could be mad about. I found out the book was written before the Bible's New Testament, yet there were word-for-word passages that matched biblical scripture. I kept this revelation to myself. The night before I was to leave, I dropped letters in a mailbox by the grocery store. They were letters of explanation as to why I was leaving, that we both made mistakes, that we were not compatible, and that I wanted to do the right thing by confessing and leaving this false life. If that meant being single for the rest of my life, I was quite okay with that. I felt the message of the letters were fair and very forgiving, seeing as how much I could have told everyone. I kept his reputation as a preacher in mind, knowing it was his livelihood and mistakes were in the past. I could ruin him, but that would give him more fuel against me. He could still change if he chose to. I had to send those letters because I refused to just disappear without explanation and have people searching for me. I sent one to our church, both our parents and siblings, and 2 couples we were good friends with. The final letter was for him, which I will leave on the nightstand along with instructions on how to pay the bills, my house keys, and my bank card. I had my packed bags hidden in the basement except for clothes and toiletries. I had stuff in my trunk already too. It was a Sunday, the one day of the week I knew he would be out of the house. As he gathered his materials for the sermon, I waited in the bathroom. "It's time to go," he said through the door. "Are you ready?" "You go ahead," I winced. "I'm having a little stomach trouble, but I'll be along soon." "Okay, love you," he said. "Love you too," I lied for the last time ever. I waited until I heard the front door close and his car driving away. I flung open the door and scanned the house for anything he may have left behind, which was a common occurrence. Nope, all clear. Adrenaline pumping, I moved fast. The church building was on the same road as our apartment, about a 10-second drive away. Since I knew by now about his computer's keylogger, keeping track of all keystrokes and mouse clicks, I used it to my advantage. I looked up a random address to the east, a couple states away, and printed driving directions to it. That should throw him off my scent, I thought. I grabbed my clothes, the basement bags, and my bathroom stuff. I left out the letter, house keys, and bank card for him to find. I took one last look at my former home and slammed the door shut behind me. My hands shook in a panic as I unlocked my car. I threw in my stuff and headed for the interstate. I merged into westbound traffic and screamed with joy. "I'm free!" I whooped at the top of my lungs. I never had to see him again. I never had to service him again, which was always painful, unpleasant, or degrading. The amount of relief I felt was so joyful and cathartic. This emotional 11-year tension, heartache, and emotional imprisonment was finally done and over with. Leaving that marriage was one of the most loving things I have ever done for myself. I left my old phone off for a month. I got a new phone with a new number. I knew he would be calling obsessively, and it felt good to not deal with that. I found out later he had looked for me where my parents lived and went to my place of work asking where I was, which I had prepped them to expect. They assured me they would tell him nothing about me, and I also told none of them, not even Mom, where I was going. I did not want to put them in the position of keeping my secret location safe. I knew how insanely persistent he could be. I drove across the country feeling so alive, more than I had felt in a very long time. I didn't know if I would survive out in the world, but anything out there seemed better to me than slowly dying in a dark, fear-based marriage or one quick blow to the head. Yoga school was the protective cocoon I needed. Removing myself from such a negative energy left me feeling raw and vulnerable. Immersing myself into yoga training was a whole new world. Everyone else there had been doing yoga for years. I was just there to figure out a way to make a living. It was not a passion. I feared my husband would somehow find me and had nightmares of him killing me, chasing me, or dragging me out of yoga school to take me home and torture me until I gave up the information he wanted about my own mistakes, names, dates, and intimate details. Those nightmares continued until about 2 years ago. Now I stand up to him if he appears at all, which is rare. It feels great. It lets me know I have healed from the past traumas that haunted me for so long. There were an unprecedented number of men in the yoga class. 1/3 of the students were men, all very muscular. I was assured that if a man of my ex's description appeared and approached me, I would absolutely be protected in any way necessary. I felt safe in my environment, which was such a precious gift to me. The program was rigorous and physically cleansing. I had 2 emotional releases, where you cry and can't stop, during yoga school. One happened while I was in a Kundalini class. I just started crying because I could feel this overwhelming, "you're going to be okay" message, and the amount of love I felt was huge. I had no idea how much gravity that fear was weighing on me until it lifted. The other release happened when we were made to do the plow pose for 23 minutes without resting. That was very strenuous for me, but we all did it together. I didn't think I would have a problem following any of the rules of the school until one of the male students started confessing he had a crush on me. I was vulnerable enough to fall for it. We were intimate just one time. He lived with his ex-wife. They were both ex-military, but he didn't tell me they were trying to patch things up. He told me they were just roommates to save money. He spoke about wanting to marry me and start a family. I should have known better, but I did not. I just believed him. His ex-wife searched his phone and saw we were texting. She reported us to the school owner, who took me into her office the next morning. She said it had to stop immediately and that he had been suspended until the next season. A surge of guilt, shame, and loathing for my own gullibility made me cry right in front of her and another instructor in the meeting. Because they knew my situation, they knew I had been taken advantage of. They clarified they were not shaming me, simply enforcing the rules. It was a program with a strict Ayurvedic diet, no outside contact with the phone or social media of any kind, and no sexual activity allowed. The ex-wife came to the school to confront me as if I were her sworn enemy. She chewed me out in front of other students. She was very intimidating and got right in my face and yelled quite loudly. She told me about how he had hit her because he suffered with PTSD and let me know it was nothing I would want to deal with. She picked up the pendant he had given me from my neck and said, "Oh, isn't that cute?" mockingly. A fellow student stepped in to protect me. Her ex-husband saw this happening and walked away from it all. That told me loud and clear that I needed to have nothing more to do with him. It was such a traumatic experience to my already raw nerves that I cried the rest of the day. One night before graduation, we all went to a karaoke bar for fun. I didn't drink, but I have always loved to sing. The other students drank, even though it meant they were breaking the rules. It was my first time doing karaoke in a public place, and I rocked it. I was extremely nervous, but once I realized the stage was a barrier between me and everyone else in the room, I was fine. 2 bars in town alternated their nights. One did Sundays and Tuesdays, and the other did Mondays and Wednesdays. I went at every opportunity for the next 6 months, although I was less inclined to go if I was in a serious relationship. It was so fun. After graduation, I found out there were 2 other couples having secret sex. Those confessions made me feel better. It was a hilarious post-graduation confessional between all of us. I ended up talking to a guy at karaoke one night who was visiting his meditation teacher in town. He invited me to come meditate. So I did. I ended up studying with the teacher for 8 months. One of the first things he taught me was that if a teacher is too serious, you should find another teacher. Your heart opens when you laugh. He also pulled a dark entity out of me. After that, I could take a full breath without straining. I had no idea I wasn't breathing fully until that very moment. I am sure I took on negative energy from my marriage and from my own depression in dealing with my husband's difficult personality. It felt good to be clear of any lingering pull he might have on me. I learned how to feel and work with energy, clear negative energy, find my inner place of peace, and experience myself as pure awareness. When I felt complete, I graduated myself from the meditation group. The teacher asked if I wanted to know my spiritual name. I agreed, so he stated, "The Light." That sounded great to me. I dated a lot after yoga school was over. It was my way of making up for lost time and developing sexual maturity. There was a shaman from another country who wanted to sleep with me, but I refused when I found out he was married and had kids. He said it was fine with his wife, but I didn't feel right about it, so we became friends instead. He took me to a summit one night where we gazed at the stars and he prayed in another language as we offered dried tobacco to the land. He told me I had to be so careful because I was very innocent, and if certain people saw this about me, they would take advantage. I promised him I would do my best to be on guard. The gentleman who introduced me to the meditation teacher was a lot of fun. He was very rich, and we had a wonderful summer fling, during which he took me to Las Vegas, Beverly Hills, and a few other places. We went to the finest restaurants, clubs, and shows. I found out during this time period that alcohol does not agree with me at all. I am way more into food anyway. I just feel like I'm drinking poison that is dehydrating me. Then my body suffers. He bought me beautiful golden Manolo Blahnik shoes, even though I didn't know anything about what made them so special. He explained they were designer and considered very high fashion. They hurt my feet, but it was a special gift, so I wore them a few times anyway. He loved being with me because I did not expect to have things paid for, but he gladly paid my way because he knew I was just surviving with no extra cash to spare. We stayed in fancy hotels. He treated me like a princess. It was exactly what I needed after such a long period of darkness. Our connection was not a long-term romance, but we agreed to be friends for life. One day, a policeman knocked on my door to serve me divorce papers. I couldn't help but smile as I reached out to receive them. He looked at me like I was crazy. No matter, I had a certificate of freedom in my hands. A golden ticket to forever cutting all ties with my husband had arrived. Inside the packet was a divorce document. I was so grateful it had been paid for. I signed it right then and there. All I had to do now was send it back, and I was a free woman. I was a little disappointed my name had not been changed back, but I guess you have to be there in person for that. I also had to sign a letter my ex had typed up stating what sins I had committed so he could be free to remarry in the church. Even though it seemed extremely one-sided, I barely read it. If that meant the divorce could be finalized, then so be it. I drove straight to the post office and marched to the counter. "How much would it cost to overnight this envelope?" I asked determinedly. The lady behind the counter looked at me with raised eyebrows. Honey, that would be around $20. I surprised her by saying, "Done," in my most jovial voice. Best $20 I ever spent. I was supposed to be sent my copy of the final document approved and stamped by the court by my ex-husband. Instead, I got nothing. No surprise there, so I called the office and paid a fee for my very own copy. Not long after that, I was at work when I got a text from him. I hadn't given him my new number, but he probably had a mutual friend get it from my private social media page. The text said I was never to talk to him or his family ever again, or else he would allow his older brother, ex-Special Forces, to take care of me the way he had been wanting to. I knew it was a death threat. I sent no reply. I was encouraged by loved ones to file a police report. I decided to go ahead and do that just in case it might be relevant in a future instance involving him and anyone else who might become a victim. So I went to the police station and showed them my phone. They took photos of the text, the phone number he used, and got all his personal information I could give them. He probably doesn't know it, but he now has a police record out west. It was around this time a friend helped me realize my ex-husband's behaviors ticked almost all the boxes for borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. Wow. The gravity of just what I had been dealing with finally hit home. When I heard the news through my parents that my ex was getting married again, I went outside and fell to my knees. "Thank you," I said to the universe. With another woman in his life, I would no longer be the focus of his mind. His new wife-to-be was in her early 20s, so I worried for her, but their marriage only lasted a year. She moved to the other side of the country too. A few years later, I got an unexpected text from him. Somehow, he got my new number. He verified who I was and asked if I wanted to talk sometime. I intuitively felt it was not a good idea. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, so I decided to check his blog that he never knew I read once or twice a year. Oh dear. It seemed so blatantly dark, cynical, and disturbing. There were some nice creative posts, but what stood out was a story about him at a bar drinking hard liquor and talking to the bartender solely to stare at her cleavage. There was just something so disrespectful about the way he described the exchange that I could see he was not going to be someone I wanted in my life. I had done forgiveness work with him on a soul level, but that was as far as I cared to take it. I texted him back that I felt it was emotionally healthy for me to keep a boundary with someone who had been part of my troubled past. I worded it this way so as not to assign blame and start another round of anger in him. I let him know I was doing just fine, that I took responsibility for my part in our past, and that I had forgiven him for his part. I spoke about positive things such as light and love. I said if he was ever able to love himself, his life would get so much easier. I meant it with all my heart. I knew that this one act alone would heal him to depths he never knew possible. I let him know that although I would not be talking to him via phone calls, I would graciously extend him the ability to text me unless it got to the point of being inappropriate. After all, years had gone by. Perhaps in spite of his dark blog posts, he had matured into treating women well. When I didn't hear back for a couple days, I felt intuitively that he had responded in another way. And I was right. He had written a new blog post about his brief exchange with me and was not kind at all. He painted me as a crazy, new age fairy, a lost cause to the sanity of logical thoughts. True to his nature as I had known in the past, he still used the most hurtful words he could find in the most eloquent fashion. I wished he could put more energy into writing with simple words of love instead of making eloquent statements of hurtful intent. Those words would have hurt me if I felt they were true, but all they did was reveal how much pain he was in. It was not about me. It never was. He had made his choice to rebel against the love I stood for, even if he did not realize I would be reading his mockery of it. He defended staunchly what he thought was truth. No matter. I blocked his number from my phone and sent him energetic waves of love and blessings. I had no hard feelings for someone suffering so badly, even if that suffering still manifested in anger at the world, at God, and at those trying to help. That was his choice, and I had no business judging it. It had nothing to do with me. Immediately after this exchange, I felt a deep need to be in nature and let my surroundings pull off any negative energy that had been absorbed during this time communicating with him. I walked by the river, teeming with life, and silently thanked the plants and animals for assisting me in cleaning up the energy. I stopped to face the water and admire it. Just then, swooping low, was a falcon right before me. It was telling me that any remaining ties with my ex-husband had been completely severed and healed because I acted from a place of love, not fear, during the entire drama of him reaching out and insulting me. The karmic cycle had been broken and transcended. I got chills as I realized the falcon is the mascot at the college where he and I first met in this lifetime. I had a small emotional release right there, crying tears of gratitude for the amazing healing I had undergone. I thanked his spirit, without whom I could not have manifested such loving confidence in my own self. He had played his role perfectly. Relationship number 2. 6 months after I arrived in my new home, it was Christmas Day and I was feeling sad. It was my first time alone for the holiday in my entire life. It was a Sunday, which was a karaoke night. Unsure of how small a crowd there might be, I decided to go anyway. I figured the less people there were, the more I could sing. The bar was actually packed. It was a huge party. I had fun singing songs and ended up talking with a nice guy about meditation. He asked me out and we went on a few dates. We decided to be together and I moved to be with him 2 states away while he finished his master's degree to become a therapist. It was the perfect healing relationship for me. He was non-judgmental in his discussions with me. He would often say, "Just be how you are." It was so refreshing. At the time, I still had some PTSD to work through. He asked me once if I left my body during sex. I admitted I did sometimes tune out my lower half due to all the sexual trauma and pain I had experienced there. He was energetically sensitive and often knew how I was feeling before I did. He and I had talks about my own quirky behavior sometimes. He would be gentle and I would be defensive and evasive, trying to shrink down into a ball. Having come from a marriage where I couldn't say anything without repercussions was definitely a factor in my communication skills at the time. We moved back to the area we had met, my original landing place out west. His family all lived in the area because he had grown up there. "My family thinks you don't like them. Why can't you show them the great personality I see at home? They're having a hard time connecting with you," he said. I blubbered something about trying harder, but that I had no idea why there was no connection. I thought maybe we just didn't have anything in common. I assured him I did like his family, I just didn't know how to relate to them. Looking back, I can see how, as with almost everyone else in my life, I made no effort to get to know them. I wait for personal questions aimed at me, but I don't ask personal questions to anyone else unless I am really trying hard to make an effort with someone, a rare occurrence. What if I ask something too personal? That would be rude. I have always looked at socialization practically. If they want me to know something about themselves, they will tell me. If they want to know something about me, they will ask me. It is my way of just letting it all unfold to be what it is. If something needs to be said, I will hear myself saying it, although in the past, I held myself back from saying much at all. As it was at the time, I felt mortified I had been the offending party without knowing it, and from then on I felt even more self-conscious around them, not knowing how to act. It also made me confused about who I was and why I was not more normal. Was it a remnant of childhood shyness? Best friend breakups? Keeping family secrets and marital abuse? I just didn't know, and did not feel I had the budget to see a doctor about it, so back under the rug it went. The time came for me to change my married name back to my given name. I was tired of being reminded of the marriage every time I had to sign my name or introduce myself. I saved up for the money to cover the court fees. As I waited in the hallway for my turn to see the judge, an old deputy with kind blue eyes connected with me in the sweetest manner. It seemed he really cared about people. Soon enough, he ushered me into the courtroom to the seat in the front. The judge was an older man as well, but very sharp. I could tell nothing got by him. Most of the legal jargon that was spoken went over my head. He asked me the mandatory questions to make sure I wasn't trying to steal someone else's identity. No, I answered earnestly to all the questions. He asked me why I didn't just change my name during the divorce. I explained in a shaky voice that I was not able to be there because I needed to be safe. I had a feeling he had seen this situation many times before. He proudly proclaimed me Julie Hudson once more, and the case was complete. I smiled and thanked him through welling tears. The deputy escorted me out to receive my paperwork in the clerk's office. They were all so nice and gentle. I felt like I had just received a sacred ceremony with angelic officiates to claim myself back from the name I had taken to for far too long. I felt so embarrassed that I could not hold back the tears while I waited for the clerk to finish preparing my papers. I faced the wall, pretending to read Social Security posters until they called my name. When I finally got to my car, I could release the tears fully. I felt so much lighter. I had no idea of the heaviness a name could bring until I let it go. My boyfriend and I decided to take a 2-week backpacking trip to Europe before settling back into home life when we moved back. Our first stop was Marrakesh, Morocco. Since we were just backpacking, we slept mostly in cheap hostels. Without a guide, we wandered a lot. I am sure there were cool things to see, but we were more concerned about getting mugged, so we took a very hot train up to the ocean, passing through Casablanca, and spent the night on the northern coast before getting on a ferry to Spain the next morning. We stayed in Seville for a couple nights. It was amazing. We saw an ancient cathedral and castle. They are so huge, beautiful, and full of history that they are worth the entrance fees. The whole town felt like an enchanted village. Spanish guitar echoing in courtyards, bustling chatter of sidewalk restaurant patrons, the aroma of fine wines and freshly baked tapas, and the clip-clop of the horse-drawn carriages filled the air. The next stop was Barcelona by train. This felt more like a party town for young adults. It was hard for us to sleep at night because of all the noise. We enjoyed seeing art museums and cathedrals there. It's a really big city and felt quite overwhelming to me. We were going to go to France, but there was some sort of strike in the travel business there, so we flew to Venice instead. It was gorgeous. When the sun hits the water, it turns into an opaque jade green color. I loved it. The pizza was pretty great, and the gelato was to die for. We spent a day in Verona and saw Juliet's balcony. There was also a really beautiful old Colosseum there. Our accommodations in Venice were at a tiny house campground just outside the city border. They had a little market and a ping pong table. I love ping pong. We got groceries to cook on our tiny stovetop. We were exhausted and low on funds by this point, so we just stayed in Venice for our last 6 days before flying home. We were so glad we went, but we both agreed that a trip like that would have been much better with more cash to spend on nicer hotels. Either way, it was an epic trip, and I have no regrets about it. Not long after we got back home, we started trying to get pregnant at his suggestion. I have never desired to birth children and was not even sure if I would be a good mother, but I also wondered if this was what I was supposed to do with my life. I had to do something after all, right? We tried for 8 months, but it didn't happen. I was on the couch with cramps one day, and the old familiar pain was back again. Something urged me to love it. I thought that was strange, but I sent it love anyway. The pain instantly reduced by half. Wow, maybe that was my purpose, to teach people how to love and heal themselves with unconditional love. But how? The urging told me to look for metaphysical schools online. So I signed up to become a doctor of metaphysical psychology. I thought since I look so young for my age, a degree would be good. I also started going to a metaphysical church in town. The church phase lasted about a year, but I enjoyed it while it lasted. My boyfriend and I were together 2.5 years before we parted ways. The relationship played itself out, and it was time for me to go. We are still good friends to this day. Relationship number 3. I woke up to a vision of a male spirit twirling with my own spirit form in mid-air. I knew it was him. Just a few days prior to this vision, a woman sat next to me at the metaphysical church, and after we talked for a few minutes, she asked me if I knew him. I did not, but she said I should be friends with him, maybe more. "Oh, I'm not looking for anyone to date," I replied. Still, she insisted he and I should be friends with a twinkle in her eye. I had seen his name on social media but knew nothing about him. Even his profile picture was a far-away shot, so I could not see his face. Now here I was having a spiritual experience with him, and we still had not met in person. It felt beautiful. I was intrigued, but after becoming friends on social media, we both admitted we were not looking for a dating scenario. About a week later, I awoke from a deep sleep at 3 a.m. Suddenly, I was in my own vision again. We were snuggling in bed, and my hand was on his chest. The amount of love we shared was so sweet and powerful. We were like two puzzle pieces that fit together perfectly, light and love. I was experiencing the perfection of our souls together without human limitation. I felt intuitively that the vision could not have happened without his deeper spiritual willingness to partake in it. Before I could chicken out, I was compelled to write him a message sharing the vision right then. How could I not tell him something so special? I made sure to let him know there was no pressure on my part for us to be together, and that it is not like me at all to just have visions of guys and message them about it. It was not a desperate manipulation by any means. This was my first time ever experiencing this type of vision. The next day, I got a reply. He wanted to meet me and asked when I was available for a hike. I felt anxious because what if he was nothing like his vision self? We talked on the phone a few times before the hike. That made both of us more comfortable with each other. He even asked me to sing for him, and I did. He loved it. So on the day we met, we hugged hello and drove together to the trailhead. He took me to his favorite native ruin, high up in the canyon walls. We meditated there, and I felt attracted to him. When we walked side by side, I felt my hand was magnetized to his, even though our hands did not touch at all. He took me to a couple more ruins even higher up and was proud of my climbing skills. It was a beautiful time. From that moment on, we were inseparable. 2 months later, we moved in together. It was fast, but it felt so natural. We felt no fear or trepidation about our decision. I learned during this time period that I had the ability to clear houses of negative energies and to do hands-on healing occasionally. A friend of mine simply told me one day, "You're going to clear this rental house of mine." He was fixing it up and wanted the negative energy of the last tenant gone. I had no clue what I was doing, which was perfect. The energy could work through me better without the mind's preconceived ideas of what should happen. It worked. When I heard about the suicide of a college acquaintance of mine, I immediately went into meditation without thinking. There was an urge to help his soul to transition. He left behind a very confused, angry wife and 2 small boys. He had been a Christian and was in a dark place. He thought he was doomed due to his religious beliefs, but it was his belief that was holding him hostage, not God. Since I had been part of the same church he had been, he listened to me. I was able to remind him of his true identity and help him see the light of other souls waiting to greet him. It took eons to convince him of this, and yet it was over in an instant. He was so grateful that he turned back to hug me for a very long time before joining the light. Just a month after the start of my new relationship, I developed a cyst, which became very painful. I saw a doctor who said surgery could help, but there was no guarantee the cyst would not grow back. I spent many days in frustration. I suffered through an ultra-strict diet and many supplements in hopes that would help it. Finally, I announced to the universe, I refuse to go through the recovery time and invasiveness of a surgery that may not even work. There will be another way to resolve this. When my beloved got home that night, he told me his good friend had just texted him to offer me a free emotional clearing session because Spirit had guided her to do so. I was ecstatic. The manifestation had worked so quickly. I went to her house and had a lovely clearing of past lives and emotional beliefs. She would not even let me tip her because it had to be completely free according to Spirit. Instead, I referred clients to her. When I got into my car, I could feel the swelling had reduced by half. About 3 days later, it was completely gone. I learned by direct experience that day that our beliefs have the potential to either hold us back or to allow us to be powerful manifestors and healers. The session left my heart open and raw for a few days, feeling overly sensitive, but that was just part of the healing process. I took my week's vacation from work to complete a past life regression or PLR training course. It was local, so no travel was necessary. The class learned the intricacies of wording and the energy of appropriate tone when bringing a person into the subconscious. We all practiced on each other multiple times. There was a lot of information and experience to integrate. Normally, a person should have a PLR at least a month apart from their last one in order to integrate properly. We all had about 10 in a week. However, everyone did really well. It felt like a small, loving family. I found that in my lifetimes, I was almost always a loner. I saw male and female lifetimes for myself. In one, I was eaten by the large animals I had hunted for my tribe in a perfect circle of life scenario. In another, I fell off a cliff into the ocean after being kicked out of my tribe for being in love with a betrothed woman. In another, I was kicked out of my tribe for being a man who was attracted to men. Then I saw myself as an Egyptian priest and having been castrated for being in love with a woman. That was tied directly to the cyst I had just healed from. In another, I saw my life in an Atlantean or Lemurian world. My beloved and I were together, and I was a spiritual healer. I saw us first as little blonde children playing. I saw our commitment ceremony in a glass-walled chapel on the beach. I saw myself giving birth to our twins. We lived in a house made of crystals. He died first, and when it was my time, his soul caught mine on the other side. That loving reunion in spirit was enough to make me physically cry, as well as the woman who was regressing me. Then I saw my most recent lifetime. I was a teenage girl in a strict 1950s home with an unemotional father and a passive mother. A boy I dated got me pregnant. He was not interested in me after that. I was sent away to have the baby boy, and he was given up for adoption. I threw myself into medical school to gain my parents' approval and became a nurse. I was a loner and depressed constantly. I felt years of tremendous guilt for having given up my baby and never seeing him again. So I stole pills from the hospital I worked at and killed myself. During the linking of who was who portion of this regression, I discovered that the baby was my ex-husband. No wonder he was so angry with me. No wonder the next woman he married after me was a nurse. No wonder I had so much trouble swallowing pills. At the end of each regression, there would be a very healing scene where souls exchanged forgiveness and blessings. After that regression, I was able to swallow pills without a problem. When the week was complete, we all went to eat lunch together for goodbyes. Everyone else seemed fine saying goodbye, but I felt really emotional. They were all going home to different parts of the country, but I felt so bonded with all of them. I did not feel socially awkward around any of them. It felt like my tribe was dissolving. Some of us had shared lifetimes together. I cried in my car for a long time until I felt okay again. After the tears were gone, I felt gratitude. My heart was raw and open again. It had been a long week full of many, many healings on deep, personal soul levels. I was so grateful to have had those touching spiritual awakenings with each of my fellow students, being both the guide and the guided. As my beloved and I were being perfect reflections of each other, our relationship was informative, challenging, and rewarding. In the first few years, he kept asking me why I was not being my authentic self. I thought I was, though, and did not know how to answer his queries. The old questions of the past were coming out from under the rug. Again. Mainly, who is the real Julie? He was intuitively sensing that something was off. How could I argue with that? He noticed my odd behavior in social situations, my stagnant energy with a slight underlying depression, my awkward silences, my lack of fearless creative expansion, and my inability to express my feelings and communicate in a mature way when challenged. There was also the fact that I made no effort to make friends. He did not want to be my everything. He wanted to know that I was from the same planet. He said I often acted like a little girl and lacked masculine energy to balance out my femininity. I was mortified and defensive each time he brought these points up. I pulled away from him more and more because I did not want even more criticism. My walls go up when I feel unsafe to be myself, which made him feel even more strongly that I was being inauthentic and hiding my true self. Retreating into myself was my way of protecting my deepest self from more discussions inquiring about that self, for which I had no answers. While I could certainly see his points were valid, his tough love life coach approach made me recoil in emotional pain as if I were being rejected on the deepest level possible. It was just his way of communicating, but I was so sensitive that it was like torture to me. I felt humiliated and confused, knowing that after all these years, I still didn't have a grip on what my issues were and how to fix them. He was not telling me anything new. I had heard it all before, just not so directly and to the point. I took it very personally, feeling I wasn't being loved for who I was being in the moment. I promised to try harder. I tried to explain that I needed a gentle, loving communication style. I am so very sensitive to any critical tone or suggestion, no matter what good, loving intentions the person might have behind it. The reason he was so persistent is because he saw snippets of the real me at home and during fun times when we would go on joyful adventures. I displayed moments of high energy and hilarity from time to time. I had moments of being free and in the present moment. He felt I was holding back due to unresolved fears. He was understandably frustrated with the inconsistencies he saw in my behavior and genuinely wanted to help me fix them all. It was his way of showing his love for me. Even though it was the most painful self-inquiry I have ever experienced, I needed that push to get through it. I just didn't think I did at the time. I was afraid of what I would find. So, as is almost always the case when faced with extreme personal transformation, I tried looking outside myself for answers and growth. I tried doing exercise classes, group activities, and sessions with spiritual coaches and healers, but nothing was changing. It was not helping me much, if at all. I spent a lot of time crying by myself after our discussions about me, wishing for death to end the pain. Suddenly, I realized the outgoing person he was describing that I could be if I just tried harder was not me. How could I hold him back from finding someone who already had those qualities instead of the struggle we found ourselves in? I thought that if I truly loved him, I should not hold him back at all. We went back and forth on whether we should stay together or not. We still loved each other so much. I reminded myself he was doing me a favor. However, I still needed that push to discover deeper parts of myself once and for all. It had not occurred to me yet to just be me unapologetically. I still didn't know who me was yet. See epilogue for an update on this relationship. Whenever he would try to teach me Qigong, which can be a very healing and balancing practice, I would feel the energy so intensely that my body would get shaky, weepy, dizzy, and faint. I would be forced to lay down and cry. I researched what might cause this according to older teachers of Qigong. Reading about it, I found it may be a heart issue, which makes sense. My body does have heart-related sensitivities. Instead of working to clear it and push through it, I have chosen to honor what the body tells me to do. Energy may move in other ways, but I am a little too sensitive for Qigong to be a fun activity. Once, when we were having a fun day on the town, we went to a lovely restaurant for dinner. I ordered small, adding quickly that I wasn't feeling well. The waitress gruffly replied that I didn't need to explain it to her. I could feel her annoyance with me, which went straight to my heart. Before I even knew what was happening, I just burst into tears. I wasn't sobbing. The tears were just springing from my eyes with full force. I turned towards the window in embarrassment and amazement. It had been a while since I was unable to control my emotions. I guess it just needed to come out. I knew the waitress's reply had nothing to do with me, really. She had her own stuff going on, but it still hurt. One night, I had a special dream. An old, bald man with squinty eyes and a smiling mustache appeared before me. Without opening his mouth, he said, "Just be." Then he smiled so big that I couldn't see his eyes anymore. I recognized his face from a picture in our living room. I asked my beloved who he was. His name was Lahiri Mahasaya, and he had been a direct student of the avatar and spiritual teacher Babaji. In the dream, many spiritual teachers meditated in the background in a room draped with lavish red, orange, and gold cloth. Babaji and Yogananda were there too. I have since come to believe Just Be is one of the simplest yet most powerful teachings I have ever received. We went to see Divine Mother Karunamai, who was holding public darshan, a holy blessing, a couple hours away from us. I had never seen her or received anyone's darshan before. We waited several hours just to get in line to approach her. After some time, I became cranky and wondered what the big deal was. I was very hungry, too. Everyone was given a blank card to write a question down for her. I had no questions, so I wrote my mantra at the time, which was, "I am." She read the card, touched my head, and said, "You will achieve God this lifetime." We went to sit for about 20 minutes before leaving. As soon as I hit the chair, an unexpected emotional release took hold of me, and I could not stop crying. It was all I could do to keep myself quiet as tears gushed out of me. The Divine Mother had given me a giant dose of unconditional love, which was about 100 times the love I empathically felt from reading NDEs years before. It felt so good to receive and to feel worthy of receiving it. I cried for a good hour after that. There was another very special dream I had, so vivid and real to me. I was sitting with a group of hippies at the base of a cliff. There was green grass, tents, and a sense of community. People were interpreting petroglyphs, which appeared magically on a scroll. Suddenly, beside me was Babaji. He wore only a white loincloth. He looked more handsome than the drawings of him I had seen, but it was definitely him. He pointed to the top of the cliff. "My ashram is up there. Would you like to see it?" I agreed, and instantly we were there. He showed me the village where the inhabitants were building their huts with the odd combination of dark lava stone and water. We sat down in the middle of the village. He held his arms open to me, and I hugged him. He began his transmission of unconditional love into me. It was not sexual. He held me and loved me to a frequency I had never experienced before. I did not even know if feeling it this deeply was possible in a physical body. The flesh would just melt away. What a glorious death it would be. I could feel facets of this love contained within itself, tiny fragments of which we experience in the physical plane. I felt the love between us take on a potential as lovers, parent and child, best friends, siblings, and any other kind of meaningful connection that might exist. I felt like I had come home after a long, arduous journey. I had finally arrived and returned to my natural state of being. Babaji then had to leave, and if I wanted to follow him, I had to feed the goldfish first. there appeared a white illuminated cave with hundreds of orange fish in illuminated miniature ponds. So I fed them all with little cracker flakes and ran to the end of the cave to follow where Babaji had gone. After a crazy maze in which certain alphabet letters had to be arrived at in the right order, I got into an elevator that had no floor to stand on and went up, up, up. And I woke up. I realized upon waking that I could not expect anyone else to love me unconditionally. No one can. The key to experiencing it on the physical plane is to seek within. Love and awareness is what we already are. Following a teacher for too long just turns into busy work. You have to jump through hoops and do things in succession, but that ultimately is just a distraction if clung to. A pointer at best. The teacher can only lead a student so far before they remember what they really are. I had prayed to learn unconditional love years before, and I was just now getting to the deeper integration of the lesson. I still had the feeling sometimes I simply wanted to leave this physical realm until after a good talk with a trusted spiritual advisor. I realized that every time in the past I had wanted to stop being in the body, questioning why death was not yet coming for me. It was actually the mind that wanted to die to a deeper truth and awakening. This was a profound realization. I could finally feel free whether I was in this body or not. I also spent time reflecting in awareness of what might be the missing key to the personality and needs of the physical body. The issues were still there even after knowing the truth of what I was on a spiritual level. There just had to be an answer. What could it be?